Welcome, listeners, to the Ecosysteming Podcast. I am your host, Thom Ruhe of NC IDEA, and I am joined today by the Honorable Mayor of Raleigh, North Carolina, Janet Cowell. Mayor Cowell, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ecosysteming Podcast. I've been looking forward to this talk for quite some time.
Yeah, it's great, Thom. Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned, obviously, Mayor of Raleigh, North Carolina, which rumor has it is the second best capital state behind only Austin, Texas.
Well, yeah, the capital city, behind Austin, and then Atlanta's right behind us. That's for livability, affordability.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'd argue that I would, having spent plenty of time in Texas and Austin, no disrespect to them, it's a great city, but I would take Raleigh over Austin in a heartbeat. You have been mayor now for about a year and a half. Is that correct?
Yeah, year and a quarter.
Give or take. Mm-hmm. And in that time, you've been making already some big, bold moves. So I thought before we go too much into your background, maybe we just start with the present and as your role as the mayor. And, what, let me ask it this way. Do you think mayors of major cities like Raleigh, they could have a role in promoting entrepreneurship within the city? Is there policy priorities that could be implemented by mayors? Do they have the power to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say some of it is really broad macro things. I view one of the most important parts of keeping Raleigh strong from a business perspective and entrepreneurship as affordability. Right. That's the word of a lot of these elections and, policy debates. But in Raleigh, of course, as a high growth southern city, is the housing affordable? Can those grads from NC State who want to start a business or, be employed here, can they actually afford to stay in Raleigh? What are the legal fees? If they want to start a family, are the schools good? I mean, all those basics are what make a city fundamentally good for entrepreneurship. And then there's the more micro targeted things like permitting and folks that are trying to get space and how easy is that, and the financing, are the banks located here, those kinds of specialty programs. But
yeah, so you mentioned banks. Obviously, that for me goes to access to capital. And, would you have an opinion? And I guess I'm going to be foreshadowing where we're going to go with this conversation, because before you were the mayor, and frankly, when we first met about a decade ago, you were the state treasurer for North Carolina, and elected to that position, served for, was that 2 terms, 8 years?
8 years. Mm-hmm.
So you know a thing or two about capital formation and access. Do you have an opinion? I mean, it doesn't have to be confined to just the city, because obviously funding is fungible. And if there's one thing COVID taught us, it's way more portable than it once was considered. Right? The proverbial, I'm not going to invest in anything I can't ride my bike to, is no longer the case. Right. What would be your take on kind of the capital stack for the state?
Yeah, well, I think financing, of course, interest rates went higher. And so you've got the sort of macro challenges. But I would say, that Raleigh is a pretty accessible place where people can get financing, be that venture capital, growth capital, commercial banking. I have a friend that started a business, and she was just talking to a commercial bank about a credit line. So, my sense is the money is flowing, in this market, and people that's not the stopping point.
That's interesting. We have funded several hundred companies over the years, and obviously we track them and as they go and raise private equity. And an interesting data point that may or may not surprise you is we do annual surveys, so we know they give us disclosures on when they raise. And they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars over just the last couple of years. It's coming up on $2 billion over the lifespan of the organization. But here's the curious point that I always, and I know I'm being provocative when I say this, but like 2/3 of the capital that they're raising, our companies here in the state of North Carolina, is coming from outside the state.
Yeah.
we're actually importing capital, private equity specifically,
Yep.
which has always been a rub to me. And the question I ask, all the GPs in the state, like, what do these funds outside our state see in our companies that our funds don't see?
Mhm.
I've always been a
Well,
head scratcher on that.
look, we've got a number of good funds, but the vast majority of these right, private equity funds are not located here. So it doesn't surprise me that when you're looking for capital in a state that, is not on the coast, that inevitably your funding may be from California, New York, Boston, or Florida. Of course, Miami becoming a bigger
Yeah.
financial hub too, as long as you can get the capital.
We've seen others too that might be surprising, like St. Louis. We've seen
Yep.
some money coming in from St. Louis. When you were the state treasurer, obviously, you were responsible for, the piggy bank for the state. I know it's an order of scale magnitude different, and there's different restrictions in what you can and cannot invest. But what made you excited to invest state resources? What were the types of investment vehicles that you thought, created the greatest ROI or the safest ROI or whatever your matrix was for doing that?
Yeah. Well, and I will go back to, so I was treasurer from '09, right after the financial crisis, through 16. And so one of the things I wanted to do was take advantage of some of the disruption, displacement. So we started investing more in, distressed real estate, credit, where there was these federal programs, um, and then also private equity. We expanded the amount, and I felt good about doing that through the pension because we knew we have major research universities. We have a strong ecosystem here of companies, and indeed, we put $500 million over two funds over kind of about a 6-year period or longer. One of the funds just started as I was leaving office, and we did deploy, and this was across early stage through buyout, so it was all phases. And then we also partnered with then Governor McCrory to start a early stage fund because we also knew there were opportunities. In that case, that was not through the pension money because we felt that was too risky. Just the risk return profile did not fit the fiduciary responsibility, but we did that one, funded it out of the lost property fund, which is of course where, money reverts if people don't pick up a check or, there's a will and the heirs don't claim the property.
Was that the Sheets Fund?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
you're referencing the Venture Capital Multiplier Fund, the VCMF
Yeah.
program.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
What was your take on how that accelerated or, helped the ecosystem? I was coming in right on the heels of that. We were kind of passing. You were going on to your next adventure as I was starting my, now current adventure. And I have to tell you, coming from Ohio, where capital formation had, been way more challenging than it was here, I was jealous. I was for my former colleagues back in the Rust Belt, like, wow, could you imagine if we had something like this, the VCMF? Did that hit the wicket that you were hoping it would?
Well, I think it's just additive to the whole environment. First off, having a pension fund like the North Carolina Pension Fund in combination with the Duke Endowment, some of the other investment funds in North Carolina is helpful because we, of course, were constantly meeting with private equity or money managers, particularly around Duke UNC basketball games. You'd see them all come into town, and then having those partnerships and getting them to take a closer look. Grosvenor was first Credit Suisse, and then Grosvenor was the partnership on the $500 million over the two funds. All of that is helpful. Does it completely, change the whole environment? Even with the size of the pension, which we were the ninth largest in the country, almost $100 billion when I was managing it. I mean, that's enough to make an impact. So
Yeah, I would say if you can't make an impact with that much money, I don't know
mm,
what it would take to do that. And obviously, that is very strategic in the planning process and what you did there. And you have, or Raleigh has, this office now of strategy and innovation. And I'm curious to understand how you see that as an instrument or tool to advance Raleigh on a national level for specifically things like smart city movement, and how that might serve citizens better and set an example, but also create entrepreneurial opportunity for founders that we have here.
yeah, well, I will say the smart city, and then we're also part of the Bloomberg network, and Bloomberg, of course, being the former mayor of New York and founder of Bloomberg. And it's amazing to have a person with that level of business acumen who understands the importance of cities as economic drivers and invest in mayors, both in the United States and globally. And I'm actually in a data track with that Bloomberg Mayors program with my city manager and others. So, I think using data as AI, starts accelerating. There's clearly a lot of programs that are used. We have like a software called Granicus that's part of a Vista, private equity portfolio that is used by cities across the country on portals of public engagement. But there's all sorts of tools and softwares. So that whole emphasis on data, how do you use data to drive decision making, not only helping the public sector, but potentially giving opportunities for other entrepreneurs.
And do you think that there's a role for the city to play that would be uh, proactive, I guess would be a way to describe it, where you could say to the public, to the citizens of the city, like, hey, if you've got ideas, because obviously AI now is going to be the new generative thing that changes all of our lives. And I won't get into the doom side of that equation, but do you see that as a way to engage more of the citizens proactively and say, hey, listen, don't wait for us to come up with an idea to serve you. If you got an idea, bring it forward.
Yeah, we certainly have like big idea sessions. Now, what that is, and say for our big ideas, it might be how do we, mitigate bad urban renewal and put bridges across highways. So, I think you can put those ideas out, and where the best venue is to developing those, could be the state level where you're dealing with a lot more of the tech transfer R&D. I would say a lot of the entrepreneurship we're dealing with, it tends to be the mom and pop shops. Again, how do you get a permit? How do you navigate all the legal things of running a small business? We have a partnership with Smith Anderson. We have business upfit, facade upfit. Another program that's interesting we're doing is the Democracy at Work, DAWI, where if you're a sort of baby boomer who's got a business and you're selling the business, trying to facilitate those sales to go local and also to the employees so that you have employee stock ownership. So, I would say a lot of what the cities are doing are more, maybe not totally the cutting edge, and that you go to the state level or federal level where you're getting, more of the R&D sort of new ideas that are looking for those capital injections. That's probably going to be at a different level.
I know it's nationally speaking. I know the trend of succession planning, like you said, the boomer generation handing over the reins is a challenge, and I think it's one of those
Mhm.
things that a lot of people do not understand nearly the size of it. In one of my former organizations at the Kauffman Foundation, where I served for 7 years, this was something already 15, 20 years ago we saw as a disturbing, might be too strong a word, but a concerning trend. I've only seen it accelerate here, in my later years. Matter of fact, I live up in northern Orange County, and we have good friends that are in that exact dilemma right now. And it's a multi-million dollar business, super
Yep.
profitable, and they have nobody to turn it over to. And
Mm.
when I've asked them, like, so what's going to happen? They're both in their mid mid-ish 60s, they're like, I suppose we'll just close. And I think, wow, the lost economic, the economic loss of that, and to say nothing of just like how it could be handed over to, whether it's an ESOP or some other arrangement. I'm encouraged to hear you say that you guys are paying attention to that, because it is a genuine problem. And I think it even cascades perhaps even more deeply once you get out of the urban corridor, because some of these businesses are like the largest employers in some
Oh, yeah,
counties.
I mean, and I forgot what the number was, but we were looking, east. Of course, Raleigh's right on that cusp of Eastern North Carolina, and so we tend to still be, the capital city of that section of a lot of opportunity in Eastern North Carolina.
It is. I don't know how in today's political environment we can find the bandwidth for it to become the priority that it needs to be. But that's why I don't work in public office, because you must have the patience of a saint to do what you have done throughout your career.
I mean, and you're talking about a lot of offensive moves on business development, but of course we are playing defense. I was with the U.S. Conference of Mayors recently, and we were talking about the disruption when you have Border Patrol coming into your city and how it shuts down. Raleigh only had one concentrated action back in November, and it was a 1-day foray out of Charlotte, into the Research Triangle. That shut down a lot of businesses for a week. Kids, the fear factor ripples through the local economy, and as these things can really. So we were also talking about detention centers, and if you set up a detention center, that almost the chilling impact of that whole zone of the city where nobody wants to be around, or or at least that's the thought. So, some people might say that's economic development. Other people are saying, well, no, that's actually not economic development. And what are the economic impacts of these federal forays into urban environments?
I think for the communities that take the stance of it's economic development, or at least welcoming it, to me, the analogy would be like welcoming a tumor into your body. Why would you do that? And, the economic impact, like you said, we have been, one of the benefits of being a private foundation, I don't get money from the state, I don't get money from the feds, is that we get to live our values, and we are equity first. When I started 10 years ago, 90% of all of our funding went to white males in the Triangle, and sometimes we'd screw up and fund a white dude in Charlotte. Over the last 10 years, that has shifted, that nearly 70% of our funding now goes to women, minority, and rural. And importantly, we did that not by putting our thumb on the scale. We never said to white male applicants, in Raleigh, like, you have -5 points on your evaluation criteria for the grant. We just invested millions of dollars through our ecosystem partner program to level the playing field. When we assessed why there was such a disparity, it wasn't that, female founders, minority founders weren't as bright or as capable. They just didn't have access. They didn't have the networks. They didn't have the debt capacity. They didn't have, access. And so we invested there. And lo and behold, when you level the playing field, you can say, okay, now it's, it's a merit-based system.
Well, and I think, cities are also trying to do that, where we'll try to introduce to people, how do you navigate becoming a vendor, for the city, or participating in the Department of Transportation projects as a small engineering firm. So a lot of education, convening, navigation of what inevitably, tends to be bureaucracies, right, at all levels of government.
Yeah. I recently got to keynote National League of Cities had a conference in your backyard right there in Raleigh. And when we got to the Q&A portion of it, that the kind of attack on equity, diversity and inclusion, like that was like the number one thing, because it's just such a chilling effect, and people having to sanitize language. And, now the appellate court holding up the administration's EO, that almost requires like a fealty pledge that you're not, like you have to, it's no longer good enough not to have certain language. You almost have to now make an affirmative statement that you are anti. which I just find draconian in so many ways that is counterintuitive and certainly counterproductive for the, for the economy. And, you are an elected official. So let me ask your perspective on this, because this has been a head scratcher for me for years. Again, going back to my time at Kaufman, they invested millions of dollars in research and data, right?
Mhm.
And data, like immigration is a net positive to our economy, period. End of sentence. Foreign-born immigrants here are 2.5 times more entrepreneurial. They start more businesses. Hispanic entrepreneurship in the state of North Carolina is the fastest growing right now sector, and it's 4x, the kind of baseline. You cannot, if you claim to care about data and you claim to care about economic impact, you can't ignore that. But yet we do. And I know I must be sounding in your ears, I must be sounding so naive.
No, I mean, believe me, as I'm in any national environment, when you're the mayor of Raleigh, which is the Research Triangle Park, right? You're out there
Yep.
saying, look, this region built itself off of R&D and, the whole science and technology and of course data and the wealth and prosperity and global impact we've had because of that. So certainly I tried to talk about continuing to fund, federal. We've cut $580 million locally, 25% of R&D across, the major universities, with Duke and UNC taking the brunt of those cuts. And then you think about what those research universities have done in terms of attracting, right, talented entrepreneurs. The friend I mentioned earlier that has started a business was originally a Chinese national, became a U.S. citizen about 2 years ago, and has already grown her business, is looking at $5 million revenue this year. Incredibly, right, just motivated and embracing all the freedoms and things that she can get, in America, and is a UNC, MBA, so got her education here. But it's you want to make sure that the best and brightest who want to make their life in the United States because they see the lifestyle, right? The opportunities that we've had in this country, and the fear that that next generation of the best and brightest will not even have the option, right? Of
Right.
choosing to stay in the United States, choosing to come here to study. And understand these are all, can be complex topics, but in general, yes, this is an area that has obviously massively benefited from that infusion of talent,
Yeah.
and made North Carolina the state that it is.
I mean, I think I am blessed in the sense that I'm first generation. My mother, father, and brother are naturalized citizens. And so I kind of grew up in that perspective of what the immigrant community is capable of. And it's remarkable what they do. But I'm going to get off
Well,
this subject.
I'm a daughter of the American Revolution, so we came over in the 1600s, and I can admire it, and also, marry with, like all the other perspectives. But it's so again, I try to use my platform in the city of Raleigh to say we want to continue to be a welcoming city with opportunity for all, and that we will, serve all, and it will be, a meritocracy, and we just, want everybody to flourish here in all the ways that one can, be that, social, emotional, and of course economic.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Why I find so much joy in our work is because when I look across our statewide network of ecosystem partners, there's such kinship, shared values around that we now refer to it as this thing of ours collectively that everybody is part of, and hopefully those efforts continue to strengthen the profile of the entire state, so that people that are inspired thusly will welcome and come here and find it a welcome environment for them to flourish. You mentioned you've been functioning in this role, or I should say at this level, for some time. You have been on an international, not only national but international stage. To all the listeners, if you don't know the full background of this incredible person, I encourage you, please, if nothing else, just look her up on LinkedIn. But I have to ask, like, I know what drives me, and I just referenced it. It was kind of the way I was brought up, by these German immigrants. It was a big influence, let's put it that way, in my life. What was it in your academic background or your upbringing? Did entrepreneurship play a path in your kind of where you are today?
As my father was a Methodist minister and, mom was a school teacher. So I would say the public service component. But I will say my dad did new church development, which is right, a pretty entrepreneurial
Oh yeah,
realm. And of course, churches can be incredibly entrepreneurial. Summit Church in Raleigh is just amazing kind of model. But so, all that fundraising, finding land, where are you going to high growth suburbs? How do you choose, the talent management, financing, all those things. My father operated a lot in that zone. So pretty different though. And it was when I went to Penn, where of course all the Wharton undergrads with their massive ambition and, intellect and everything else going on at Penn, I think is where I got exposed to business, and then lived in Asia for 3.5 years. So, you think about cities like Hong Kong, right? And that sort of spirit and entrepreneurship of that city, and then what's happened in Asia over the generation. Which, as I stay in touch with, I studied in China in 1989 and took Mandarin, and I am in touch now with the Chinese community, as mayor. And I've just mentioned to them at the Lunar New Year festival, what an incredible trajectory, probably unprecedented, on the globe, of what's happened in China from the 80s to now. Just the complete, the middle class, the amount of development that, the thought leadership, and obviously, a lot of complexities and a lot of
sure.
many things thrown into that basket that you might agree or disagree, and obviously a very different model, than the United States to date. But nevertheless, it is incredible to have been to see and be part of that, and then also, try to get that the Asian community and Raleigh, and and all these communities, but embracing them and trying to figure out right how to make them successful and the city benefit from that drive and energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you understand, when you have that global perspective, it helps frame, the context of your thinking here. And I've often thought, especially with more localized politics, that where you see great public servants versus ones that may be actually working against the interests of their constituents, sometimes it's just a lack of perspective, right? Because they've never had that foreign experience. I remember, there was a time I did extensive travel. I served a 2-year stint on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council, so I was going to the Middle East. During the Obama administration, I was being deployed into majority Muslim countries it was kind of considered soft policy, preach the gospel of entrepreneurship. And so when you go to a place like Bangladesh and you learn, like, poverty, it resets your scale, right? You live here in the States, you grow up in the States, and we have poverty. There's no question about that. But when you go to another part of the world and you experience it from that cultural perspective and a different
Mhm.
scale, I think it opens your mind to being a little more thoughtful,
Yeah.
about some things.
Yeah, I think the international exposure, I would say one of the challenges locally to electeds is just that, maybe not at the scale of China, right? But places like Raleigh, they have grown and changed dramatically in the past 2 to 3 decades. And if you were from here and you grew up in a certain way, in a certain context, it is difficult, right, to accommodate the amount of change that we've seen, this influx of newcomers. And, so, and I understand also for the decision makers, right? What worked when you were a town of 1,000 and you've got now international capital coming at you and you're, all this influx, it is hard to even know what's coming at you and how to make the best decisions for your community. So these are challenging in certain ways, and of course you have cities that are contracting. That's got its own challenge. I mean, I think we feel fortunate that we're on the growth side of that equation, but it does come with a lot of tumultuous change for a community and challenges to the leaders navigating that.
And it's not, prosperity is not necessarily equitable. I mean, you can have great growth in Raleigh, which you are, and in other major metro areas. Obviously, the great country of Mecklenburg County is doing well, and we're seeing the coast and Wilmington area, New Hanover, doing well. But I often reflect on the Economic Innovation Group's Distressed Communities Index data, and I typically make the point that if you go into their data modeling tool, you can dial in by zip code. I find that a little bit too specific. So if you just look by county, North Carolina has, last time I checked, I think it's 7. There are 7 borders. So 2 counties sharing a border where one county is in the top quintile of prosperity and the other county is in the lowest quintile. So you conceivably have people separated by only a few miles living desperately different lives, right? Some that go grocery shopping without a regard to price, and they're shopping at these high-end retailers that have all the great organic everything, to somebody that has to count every penny and buys groceries at the Dollar General. And until our policymakers reconcile that or show empathy to that or any rigor around thinking on solving that, I'm not convinced they're doing their job.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up because I first served on council in the early 2000s when the creative class came out, and you thought, okay, these new economies are going to really have the rising tide, right? All these, and then you realize that these new economies are actually some of the most brutal. That the college towns, Democratic Party, progressive, right? Supposedly like that, but are almost the worst in the country. And that was an eye opener for me as I came back into local politics after years. And you realize, wow, like all of that work and effort and things have not gotten better, right? The prosperity is not shared. What do you do to mitigate that economic mobility in the South? And part of these things is trying to understand the levers you have locally, because when it comes to healthcare, right? Do people have access to healthcare? And we know that was part of the challenge of the South, was that people did not have access and you had healthcare debt, affordable housing. All the time we have people saying, you're failing us on affordable housing. You're not doing enough. And, we're in a state where where there's no rent control. There's no ability to have inclusive affordable housing. It can only be voluntarily offered. We do have, public housing amenities. So you've got certain tools, other things you don't have, and you're trying to figure out, how do you mitigate this social inequality? How do you bring everybody into this prosperity and growth? And I think, Raleigh, the things we've done best is probably, the amenities of so much free. All the museums are free. All the greenways are free. These incredible new parks we built, like Dix Park, is free. And you're trying to get the transportation, right? All these things so that people can afford to live here, have all those advantages, a school district that's been integrated across socioeconomic, diversity. Those are the things we've done right, but we clearly have a lot more to go.
Affordable housing is Raleigh in North Carolina. Are we one of the states that are being plagued by hedge funds right now, buying up so many single family homes?
A lot of private equity. And in fact, of course, that also came up at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And of course, a lot of the communities most targeted are communities of color, near downtowns that were, the real estate was good, but they traditionally haven't had the protections of white communities in terms of zoning or overlays. And that just set up this moment of southern growth cities, influx of capital, and so you do see the issue of gentrification, people being priced out is real, certainly in cities like Charlotte, Raleigh, and across the South.
So let me ask you this, and I'm sorry, this is going to be a tough question. So is the answer data centers? Should Raleigh set up multiple data centers so that all of big AI can kind of suck all the power out of our grid and create 12 screwdriver turning jobs? And obviously I'm being very facetious and leading the witness here.
You know, the data centers is another hot topic nationally among mayors. I will say in Wake County, you know, I have not seen those pressures because the land in Wake County is generally so expensive.
Too expensive. Yeah.
That it's the outlying counties that you mentioned, right? Probably on the cusp, where some of that's going. And then do you have the water resources? You know, I will say that Raleigh controls the water for all of eastern Wake County. We have invested heavily in our water systems. That is not the case across, you know, all, even in the, you know, subtropical South where water, you know, seemingly is plentiful. So I think these are tricky decisions for localities. I'm from Memphis, where of course Elon Musk has invested, you know, big dollars in South Memphis and all the consternation and debate that comes around these things.
I think the again, any community that is embracing and welcoming data centers are one of two things. They're either that desperate, brutally desperate, and I can have sympathy and empathy for those communities, right? Because it's something, or they're just being willfully ignorant to the data because it's already there. There's case studies. Virginia can't even afford to take another data center. They are so tapped out. And any listener that's listening to this, you need more data on that, just hit up Good Jobs First. They've been doing the data analysis on this. 𝘌𝘰𝘴𝘵𝘮𝘯𝘨, I think he's retired now, unfortunately. He was a keynote speaker at our summit a few years ago. He brought the receipts that data centers are just terrible for the unit economics are terrible for a state that brings them in. So, but I don't want to end on a down note like that. So I'd like to conclude these sessions with just a little FYI. If you had to guess how many mutual connections you and I have on LinkedIn, would you hazard a guess or have a number to throw out?
I would say 400.
Wow, you are probably one of the closest to come in at that. It's just shy of. So, and then I always like to do a little sampling, you know, of who they are, and not surprisingly, it's the vast majority is from North Carolina. But two that we share near and dear to my heart are Karen Levert and Mitch Muma, both, you know, past directors of NC Idea. Matter of fact, they were part of the board that hired me nearly 10 years ago. March 1st will be my 10-year anniversary. It feels like it's just been a year.
I just saw Karen last week, and of course, she's now living in Asheville and loving it. So my goal is I need to get up there and visit.
Yeah, we both do. As she extended the offer, I was with her last week as well. We've been doing a series of meetings with certain state officials about how we can advance a bolder entrepreneurship vision to economic development. You know, we will never break our addiction to throwing, you know, tax incentives at large established companies to move here. We don't have enough time. We'd have to record a whole nother episode to get into the law of diminishing returns on that. But if we can do a this and strategy where we can talk to companies and say, hey, listen, nobody does R&D anymore. The days of, you know, GE and Bell Labs are over. They acquire innovation, and that's your startup ecosystem. So be proud of, you know, the entrepreneurship ecosystem we have in the state of North Carolina. Use it as a selling feature, because they are going to be the ones that are going to be tinkering, you know, in these co-working spaces, you know, Raleigh founded and other places, and creating the next generation of your product. So I think maybe that's a great place to land the plane. Mayor Cowell, thank you so much for making time. I know you're incredibly busy. It's a big job with a lot of demands on your time, but thank you for carving out some time for us today. And to listeners of the Ecosysteming podcast, feel free to check out other episodes. And as always, if you have ideas for guests or other topics, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.